Welcome, dear listener, to this soothing journey through time. As you settle into the comfort of your space, imagine yourself drifting into a world long past where the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, the distant murmur of busy people, and the rhythmic movement of life itself. The world we will explore today is one of both elegance and hardship, beauty and struggle. We'll explore the vibrant yet often difficult life of the Tudor kitchen, the dramas of the royal court, and the stories that wove themselves into the fabric of everyday Tudor life. In this journey, we won't rush. We will move slowly, deliberately, allowing the stories to unfold with ease, as though we are stepping into the lives of those who lived centuries ago. You can relax, close your eyes if you wish, and imagine yourself in the heart of a Tudor kitchen. The sounds of busy servants, the crackling of the fire, the taste of bread just pulled from the oven, it all becomes vivid in your mind as we gently explore history together. Let yourself be carried away by the rhythm of their lives, even as we learn of the struggles they endured. This is a story of the everyday, of the world behind the glittering court and the royal feast. Here, we begin. The Tudor kitchen. At first glance, it may seem like a place of grandeur, where the finest meats and fruits are prepared for the feasts that grace the tables of Henry VIII. If you were to step into one of these grand kitchens, the reality would soon become apparent. It was a place of constant motion, an overwhelming symphony of heat, noise, and toil. It was a realm where the lines between luxury and hardship blurred, where the demands of the court, the ever-present need to feed the king and his guests, weighed heavily on those who worked there. The kitchen, after all, had only one purpose: to keep the monarch satisfied, no matter the cost. The first thing you would notice, as you step into the bustling Tudor kitchen, is the heat. There are no modern appliances, no fancy ovens with timers or temperature controls. Instead, everything is done over open flames. The hearth dominates the room, its crackling fire sending waves of warmth throughout. The kitchen is alive with the hissing sound of meat roasting on spits, the thick aroma of burning wood mingling with the scent of sizzling fat. As you step closer to the hearth, the heat becomes almost unbearable, but there is no relief. The air is thick, hot, and stifling. This heat is constant. The fire must be stoked constantly, its temperature carefully regulated by those whose hands are burned daily from managing the fires. Now, imagine the chaos of the kitchen staff. There are cooks, butchers, bakers, and scullions, all moving in a carefully coordinated frenzy. Despite the supposed order, there's a palpable tension and unspoken hierarchy in which those who control the fire and the food hold the greatest power. There's the head cook, of course, a position of great responsibility, but also constant stress. Beneath them, the assistants and kitchen hands work tirelessly, chopping, stirring, and cleaning, in a whirl of activity. They have no time to rest. The meals for the court must be prepared to perfection, and there is no room for mistakes. If something is burnt, undercooked, or served late, it is not just the food that suffers, it is the reputation of the kitchen, and the punishment may be harsh. The kitchen itself is crowded, with little room to breathe. In one corner, there are baskets of live chickens, ducks, and geese, animals that are kept alive until they are ready to be slaughtered and cooked. The sound of squawking, the movement of feathers, adds another layer of sensory overload to the kitchen's atmosphere. And then, there are the smells: meat roasting on the spit, pastries baking in the oven, and the earthy scent of vegetables being peeled, all mixing together in a way that might be overwhelming for those unaccustomed to such an environment. Despite the intense work, there is no glamour here. The workers, regardless of their skill or position, are at the mercy of the demands placed on them. They must endure long hours, with little respite, and constantly fight the risk of injury. The burning heat of the fire, the sharp knives used to butcher meat, the weight of the heavy pots and pans that must be carried and cleaned, all these combine to create an environment that is not for the faint-hearted. Injuries are common. The threat of being burned by the open flame, or the risk of cutting oneself on a sharp knife, is ever present. And yet, there is little time for rest or recuperation. The pace of work is unrelenting, but in a way, there is a rhythm to it. For those who work in the Tudor kitchen, there is a certain familiarity that comes with the routine. The same tasks are repeated day after day, and while there is little room for personal respite, there is also a sense of shared purpose. The work is difficult, yes, but it is also meaningful. For, at the end of the day, the food that emerges from this chaotic environment will be placed before the king and his court. And in that moment, there is pride, a sense of accomplishment in having fed the royal household. As you listen to the steady rhythm of the kitchen, you might begin to feel the weight of the hours that passed, the sweat that clung to the workers' brows, the constant strain of trying to get everything just right. But it is not all grim. There are moments of respite, too, when a successful feast has been served, and the kitchen crew can share in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The demands of the Tudor kitchen, though, were never truly over. With every meal served, there were always more to be prepared. The kitchen was always on standby, always ready for the next royal banquet, the next event that would demand its full attention. And while this might seem like a life of unending labor, it was also a life of connection between those who worked in the kitchen, between those who shared the meals they prepared, and between those who were part of a system far larger than themselves. As we leave the hustle of the Tudor kitchen behind, imagine yourself stepping into the grandiose halls of the court-rich tapestries lining the walls. The soft flicker of candlelight casting shadows across the stone floor. The air is cooler here, and it is filled with the quiet whispers of courtiers, the rustle of fine silk, and the hushed murmurs of those who are always watching, always waiting for the next turn of events. It is within this atmosphere of opulence and intrigue that we find the story of Anne Boleyn, a woman who rose from relative obscurity to become one of the most influential figures in English history. Anne Boleyn's story begins in the early 1500s. Born into an aristocratic family, Anne's early years were spent at the court of Margaret of Austria, where she honed the skills that would later define her intelligence, wit, and charm. But Anne was not content with the quiet life of a noblewoman. She sought something more, something greater, and it was in the English court that she began to make her mark. This was a place where the lives of the powerful were constantly in flux, and ambition could carry you as far as your ability to navigate its treacherous waters. Anne's rise was inextricably linked to one man, Henry VIII. When it entered his life, the king was already in the midst of a personal and political crisis. His marriage to Catherine of Aragon had failed to produce a male heir, and the weight of the Tudor dynasty's future pressed heavily upon it. Anne, with her sharp intellect, her wit, and her beauty, caught Henry's attention, and it was not long before their relationship blossomed into one of the most famous and fateful love stories in history. Imagine, for a moment, the court in all its splendor. The soft melodies of a lute fill the air, the smell of perfumes and spices is pervasive, and the constant hum of life creates an atmosphere that is both intoxicating and fragile. In this delicate world, Anne Boleyn became the object of Henry's obsession. Their secret courtship was filled with tension, for Henry's desire for a male heir meant that his marriage to Catherine must end, and Anne stood as the key to that change. The tension in the court was palpable, for Anne's relationship with Henry challenged the established order. The Queen, Catherine, was still very much alive, and the idea of Anne replacing her was not only scandalous but a direct challenge to the established power structures of the English Church. Yet Anne's influence was undeniable, and her ambition matched that of the king. She was determined to have her own crown, to rule as queen in her own right. Eventually, Henry's desire for and lead to the unthinkable, the break from Rome. The king's desire for a divorce from Catherine was met with resistance from the Pope, who refused to annul the marriage. This religious dispute would become one of the defining moments of the English Reformation, as Henry broke from the Roman Catholic Church and established the Church of England. Anne's role in this religious revolution cannot be understated. Through her, Henry was able to achieve his goal of marrying again, this time to Anne herself. The marriage between Henry and Anne took place in 1533, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though Anne would fulfill the destiny she had so carefully crafted. She was crowned queen consort, a position of immense power, and her influence at court grew with each passing day. However, despite her political and social triumphs, the shadow of her failure to produce a male heir soon began to cast a pall over her reign. She had given birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. But in the eyes of Henry and much of the court, this was not enough. The Tudor dynasty needed a son. As time wore on, Anne's position grew more precarious. The whispers of court conspiracies, of alliances, forged and broken, filled the air. She found herself surrounded by enemies, those who resented her rise, those who feared her influence, and those who yearned for the return of Catherine's daughter, Mary. In the end, Anne's enemies would turn against her in the most brutal of ways. Imagine yourself in the court, now heavily decorated with tapestries and candlelight. Yet, beneath this grandeur, there is a palpable sense of unease. Henry, once so enamored with Anne, is now growing tired of her, and rumors swirl of her infidelity. The political climate is shifting. Anne's once loyal allies begin to distance themselves from her, and she finds herself trapped in a web of intrigue and betrayal. In 1536, Anne was arrested on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, accusations that were almost certainly fabricated. The trial was swift, its outcome all but guaranteed. Despite her protests of innocence, Anne was found guilty, and on May 19th of that year, she was executed by beheading at the Tower of London. Her fall from grace was as swift and dramatic as her rise, and in a single moment, the world that had once held her in such high regard turned its back on her. Anne Boleyn's death, however, did not end her story. In the years following her execution, her daughter, Elizabeth, would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs, ushering in a golden age that would bear her name. But for Anne, that legacy came too late. In her lifetime, she had been a pawn in the game of power, a figure caught between ambition, love, and betrayal. Her rise and fall served as a stark reminder of the volatility of the Tudor court, where fortunes could shift as quickly as the wind. As you reflect on Anne's story, take a moment to consider the complexity of her life. She was a woman of remarkable ambition, intelligence, and beauty, yet she was ultimately undone by the very forces that she had helped set in motion. Her life was a testament to the dangers of power and the precariousness of being a woman in a world where your worth was often defined by your ability to provide a male heir. As we leave the drama of Anne Boleyn's tragic arc behind, imagine the quiet shift in atmosphere. The air is once again thick with the smell of roasting meat, the flutter of pages turning in old recipe books, and the clink of silverware being polished for another royal feast. But this time, instead of bustling kitchens and political intrigue, we step into a world of forgotten ingredients, peculiar dishes, and a culinary legacy that has largely disappeared from modern taste. Welcome to the lost world of Tudor court cuisine, a place where meals were far from simple and the pursuit of flavor was as complex as the kingdom itself. Picture, for a moment, the kitchens of the Tudor court, where the finest ingredients often from far-flung lands came together in strange and unexpected ways. The sounds of chopping, grinding, and stirring fill the air, but beneath the clamor is something deeper, a sense of purpose. The food prepared here was more than just sustenance. It was a symbol of wealth, power, and the cultural identity of the Tudor dynasty. Tudor cuisine was known for its variety and richness, and its recipes were often guarded secrets, passed down through generations of royal cooks. The court's elaborate banquets were an important part of political life, and each feast served as both a display of abundance and a tool for diplomacy. The more elaborate the meal, the more the monarchy appeared powerful, refined, and worthy of allegiance. But many of these recipes, rich with odd combinations of ingredients, have long since been forgotten or lost to history. As you drift through the halls of this culinary world, imagine yourself standing in a grand banquet hall. The long wooden table is heaving with delicacies: roasted venison, boar's head crowned with apples, pies filled with plums, and delicately spiced puddings. The air is thick with the aromas of cinnamon, saffron, and cloves, and the gentle hum of conversation mingles with the clinking of goblets. There are no modern conveniences here, no refrigeration, no preserved jars of fruit. Every meal is an effort, carefully planned, prepared, and presented. Yet, the Tudor kitchen was not without its peculiarities. The cuisine was shaped by both necessity and blending the tastes of the elite with the resources available to them. Sugar, an expensive commodity at the time, was used liberally, even in savory dishes. One of the more curious examples of this is the use of sugar in sauces for meats, a combination that would seem strange by today's standards. Imagine a rich venison stew, slow-cooked to perfection, then finished with a touch of sugar and vinegar, flavor profile that feels almost foreign to the modern palate, but was considered a delicacy at the time. But it wasn't just the spices and sweets that made Tudor cuisine unique. There were also exotic ingredients that were carefully cultivated to be as impressive as they were. Fruits such as oranges, pomegranates, and figs were prized possessions, flown in from the Mediterranean or from distant parts of the empire. Rare herbs, like ginger and nutmeg, were added to dishes with a lavish hand, making the meals of the Tudor court not just an indulgence, but a statement. To dine at court was to partake in an experience of grandeur, to taste the world in a single meal. One of the most fascinating aspects of Tudor cuisine is the way it incorporated ingredients that would be unfamiliar to us today. For instance, the use of almond milk was widespread, often as a substitute for dairy in both sweet and savory dishes. At the time, almonds were a symbol of wealth, and the use of almond milk in a dish like almond buttered fish was a sign of sophistication. Imagine the soft, nutty texture of almond milk mixed with delicate white fish, seasoned with a hint of salt and a touch of saffron. It's an odd combination, but one that speaks to the creative and experimental nature of Tudor cooks. Yet, perhaps the most curious and now most inaccessible aspect of Tudor cuisine lies in its desserts. The desserts of the court were extravagant, made with fruits, spices, and sometimes even sugar. A dish called marchpane, which is similar to what we now know as marzipan, was often shaped into elaborate forms, flowers, animals, and even entire scenes. Imagine these delicate, sugar-filled creations set before you at a banquet, gleaming in the candlelight as if they were jewels, waiting to be savored. But not all desserts were sweet, and not all dishes were what we would consider tasty by modern standards. Tudor cooks often favored the bizarre and the unusual, making use of banned spices, obscure ingredients, and unusual cooking methods. In some recipes, for example, you might find the use of century eggs, a fermented egg, or even dishes that combined animal parts in strange combinations. These foods were prepared as a sign of wealth and refinement, but also of a world that had no taste for subtlety. As the royal court enjoyed these lavish meals, the ingredients that came from distant lands were not always easy to come by. They were expensive and often highly perishable. The Tudor court, in its pursuit of a culinary legacy, did not shy away from the cost. But as we look back, it is clear that many of the extravagant dishes prepared at the time have been lost. The knowledge of these ingredients, the recipes, and the techniques has faded into history. Still, the fascination with Tudor food remains. Archaeologists and historians continue to piece together these lost culinary secrets, attempting to recreate the meals that once filled the royal tables. In recent years, there have been attempts to revive Tudor recipes, experimenting with ingredients like sugar, saffron, and exotic fruits, trying to recapture the essence of those long-forgotten dishes. But for the most part, these recipes remain elusive, their flavors preserved only in the imagination and in the pages of dusty old cookbooks. As you reflect on the strange and delightful foods of the Tudor court, consider the connection between food, culture, and identity. The meals served at the Tudor court were not simply for nourishment, they were a way of telling the world who you were. A lavish feast was a statement of power, of wealth, and of a kingdom that would stop at nothing to demonstrate its superiority. The exotic spices, the rich desserts, the extravagant presentational, spoke to a world that believed food could convey messages beyond just taste. As we leave the rich and complex world of Tudor cuisine behind, let your mind shift once more, this time toward the dazzling world of Tudor fashion. Picture yourself in the grand halls of Hampton Court, or the lavish court of Whitehall, the sounds of laughter and soft conversation mingling with the clinking of goblets. The scent of perfumed bodies and the rich leather of boots fills the air. But it is the fashion that commands your attention. The sumptuous velvets, silks, and furs that envelop the bodies of the nobility. Here, clothing was more than just a means of warmth or modesty, it was a reflection of power, status, and identity. Tudor fashion was a language all its own, and it spoke volumes about its wearer. In a world where political and social life were tightly intertwined, fashion served as a powerful tool for signaling not just wealth but also one's place in the rigid hierarchy of court society. But no fabric in the Tudor wardrobe was as potent in its symbolism as velvet. Velvet, with its soft, luxurious texture, was reserved for the highest ranks of society. Imagine the feel of it, its dense pile that catches the light, shifting in color with every movement. Velvet was not simply a fabric, it was a statement, a symbol of wealth and influence, often used in elaborate gowns, cloaks, and tunics. To wear velvet was to declare one's proximity to power, and only the wealthiest could afford it. The cost of velvet was immense. It was produced with great effort and skill, often requiring hours of meticulous work by skilled craftsmen. Its richness was unmatched, and it became the hallmark of the Tudor elite. As you imagine yourself in this world, the fashion of the court is not only luxurious, but also highly symbolic. The Tudors were known for their love of and their fashion reflected their desire to showcase not only their wealth, but also their moral and political standing. The colors worn at court were of particular importance, each hue carrying its own meaning. Red, for example, was a symbol of power and ambition, often seen in the clothing of those in high favor at court. Green represented fertility and prosperity, while purple, an extremely rare and costly color, was reserved for royalty. The Tudor court was, after all, a place where even the smallest detail of one's attire could speak volumes. The women of the court, in particular, were known for their elaborate gowns, which featured deep, rich hues of velvet, satin, and brocade. Picture the swirling skirts, the high collars, the tight bodices, and the layers of lace and jewels. Each garment was a work of art, carefully constructed to accentuate the wearer's status. Women of noble birth would have their dresses made from the finest fabrics, embroidered with intricate patterns, and often lined with fur or silk. The gowns were heavy, their intricate layers sometimes weighing down the wearers, but they were designed to make a statement, a declaration of the wearer's importance in the political drama of the time. Men, too, were adorned in opulent garments, though their attire was often more restrained in its complexity. The doublet, a close-fitting jacket, was a central piece of a nobleman's wardrobe. It was made of fine wool, velvet, or silk, often decorated with elaborate embroidery or studs. Over this, men wore the farthingale, a type of padded skirt, which gave their silhouette a wider, more imposing appearance. The emphasis was on creating a strong, authoritative figure-on image of stability and power. However, fashion was not just about grandeur. It was also about protection and status. The cut and fit of garments were heavily regulated, and the use of certain fabrics and styles was controlled by laws designed to maintain class distinctions. For example, only the nobility and clergy were permitted to wear furs such as ermine or sable. The elaborate designs and luxurious fabrics were, in many ways, a barrier between the classes, a way of marking who belonged to the higher echelons of society and who did not. But perhaps the most striking feature of Tudor fashion was its symbolic power. Clothes were not merely items of personal expression. They were tools of social control. As the court shifted, as allegiances changed, so too did the styles of dress. A simple change in one's attire could signify a shift in loyalty, a quiet rebellion, or a new political allegiance. This was particularly evident in the reign of Henry VIII, where the court's fashion reflected the tumultuous nature of his rule. The sumptuous attire worn by the court not only demonstrated their wealth and power, but also reinforced the rigid social hierarchy that defined Tudor life. The king's robes, rich with velvet and gold, would have been the epitome of authority, signaling that the monarch was the absolute ruler. His queens, similarly, would wear gowns of velvet pearls and intricate lace to signify their own royal status, while the courtiers, though dressed finely, were ever aware that their attire could never eclipse that of the monarch. As you imagine yourself moving through the grand halls of the Tudor court, you might feel the weight of these social symbols around you. The velvet of the royal gowns, the glint of gold jewelry, and the sheen of rich fabrics are not merely about beauty. They are messages in fabric, declarations of power, and quiet assertions of rank. There is a rhythm to the clothing worn by the nobility, one that mirrors the rhythm of their lives, carefully orchestrated, meticulously planned, and ever so deliberate. Yet, as beautiful as the fashion may be, it is also a sign of the harsh realities of the Tudor court. Beneath the layers of velvet and silk, the courtiers were often trapped in a world of dangerous politics, cutthroat competition, and constant intrigue. The luxurious attire was, in many ways, a mask one that concealed the struggles, betrayals, and ambitions that lay beneath the surface. But even in its opulence, the fashion of the Tudor era tells a story, one of power, ambition, and the constant desire to be seen, to be noticed, and to leave a lasting legacy. As we conclude our journey through the extravagant world of Tudor fashion, let us take a moment to reflect on the richness of the era. From the chaos of the Tudor kitchens, to the rise and fall of Anne Boleyn, to the mysterious lost recipes of the royal court, and finally, to the velvet-clad world of the nobles. These stories have painted a picture of a time was at once full of grandeur and fraught with tension. In this world, nothing was as simple as it seemed. Behind every feast was a struggle. Behind every piece of clothing, a statement of power. And behind every figure at court, a carefully crafted persona. As we return to the present, take a moment to appreciate the comfort of your surroundings and the world of possibilities that history has left behind. We have now completed our journey through the tumultuous and extravagant world of the Tudor period. As you rest your mind, let these stories settle, knowing that the past, with all its complexities, continues to offer us lessons for the present. Good night, dear listener, and may your dreams be as rich and intriguing as the history we've explored together.